All right. Welcome everyone holding by the Book of Leviticus Chapter 16. Again, want to welcome everyone holding by the Book of Leviticus Chapter 16, speaking through this Or Chaim HaKadosh and different aspects of the sin of Nadav and Avihu and what it potentially caused their death. Spoke last week pretty much about sin of the golden calf and how that played a role, and how that played a role in the death of two sons of Aaron. So the Or Chaim HaKadosh continues, and he says that, let's go back, look at the beginning of the verse. It says, Moshe, God spoke to Moshe. We don't know what he said, right? We had a whole discussion about that, right? It doesn't say what he said, but it says, Acharei Mois, Shnei B'nei Aaron, Kravosam Lifnei Hashem Yamus. Right, that after their death, right, after their death, they became too close. We'll see what that means. So you see the next verse, we get there. And they came in front of God, right? They came in front of God, and they died. Right, so comes the Or Chaim HaKadosh, and he says, let's understand more. What does it mean after their death? Right, what does it mean after their death? That we know that God commands, you're not allowed to enter, that a Kohen, not allowed to enter the Holy of Holies whenever he wants. When's the Kohen, when's the high priest allowed to enter the Holy of Holies? It's only allowed in Yom Kippur. And that's where he wears the 8 pagodim. He wears the 8 vestments, as the Torah tells us, which we'll get to. We've already spoken actually about that in the book of Exodus. But there are 8 vestments, 8 types of clothing that the Kohen wears. And he wears what they call the big days of. He wears the clothing of gold. Right? He wears the clothing of gold. Now, there's a problem over here. What's the problem? What's the obvious problem? The obvious problem is that how can Aaron go in the Holy of Holies? Because he did something wrong at some level, very hard to understand exactly what it was. If you go through the sin of the golden calf, go through the commentaries there. But what's the problem? How can he wear the clothing of the high priest? Right? How can he wear the clothing of the high priest if he's wearing gold? Now you're going to say, what's the problem? What's the problem with wearing gold? Right? So the Gemara says, Rosh Hashanah 26a, anyone wants to look it up, there's a statement that the Gemara says, a kategor nasa senegel. Now, what does that mean? It means the one who's the accusing one, right, or the prosecuting one, cannot be the one, right, being accused. Meaning, translate something like that. Meaning that, what did Aaron do? Aaron somehow sinned at some level, as we mentioned, by the sin of the golden calf. Now, how could he go into the Holy of Holies? The holiest place ever, right? The holiest place, one day a year in Yom Kippur, if he himself did some level of a sin with the golden calf. Right? In other words, what's he doing? He himself sins at some level. Right? He himself sins. Again, at some level, whatever it is. So, but if he sinned with the golden calf, then the sin itself, for him to go in the Holy of Holies, going to be a little bit problematic, right? In other words, the accuser, that's what I wanted to say, the accuser cannot be the defender, right? That's what the Talmud here says. In Rosh Hashanah 26a, right? The accuser is the one that cannot be the defender, right? So in other words, if that's true, then how could he bring the sacrifice? Right? Meaning, if he did something wrong, what's the problem? God's going to take him to task. He says, what? You're going to wear the golden clothing? You're going to wear the big day zav? But didn't you do at some level sin with the golden calf? So how are you going to defend the Jewish people when you're being accused? That's the question the Gemara asks. How can it be? In other words, you did something wrong at some level, right? Some minor level, whatever it is. And he is trying to defend. He's going to gain atonement for the Jewish people. He's going to wear the golden clothing, right? He's going to wear the golden vestments to go in the Holy of Holies. But how in the world can he defend the Jewish people and pray for their atonements when what did he do? He sinned with the golden calf, right? At whatever level, right? So we say that the accuser cannot be the defender. How can he be the defender over here? Right? Because it says after the death of Aaron's two sons, he says, how can Aaron now wear the vestments of gold? The accuser cannot be the defender, as the Talmud here tells me. So now maybe you'll say, says Or Chaim HaKadosh, maybe we'll say the fact that Aaron goes in and he goes into the Holy of Holies, maybe he's not going to be held accountable. Maybe for such a thing he won't be held accountable. Right? Maybe the Torah is not going to be so stringent over here. But what's the problem? Says Or Chaim HaKadosh, that might be good. Maybe God's going to have compassion. So if he has compassion, maybe he's not going to get punished for doing this. But what's the problem? Problem is he hasn't got total atonement yet. There's still something in the air, spiritually speaking. There's something there from the sin of the golden calf. It has not been totally erased. Now we know if we read the verses over there, God says, if I go amongst the Jewish people, that's the whole point. That when the Mishkan is put up, God says, I want to, in Exodus chapter 25, verse 8, God says, I want to put myself in this world. Very hard to understand. If God is infinite, how is he going to put himself in a box in the Mishkan? So that's Kabbalah 101, 101.8. Well, we're not going to go there, but the point is God says, if I go amongst the Jewish people, I'm going to wipe them out. I'm 100% going to wipe them out. So Moshe Rabbeinu he prays, and he makes a compromise. What's the compromise? God is not going to show his presence there, because otherwise Jewish people will be wiped out. So God promises that I'm going to take revenge. I'm going to take revenge over here against the Jewish people every generation. So in other words, it's going to be hard for the Jewish people every generation, and they're going to suffer partly because of the sin of the golden calf. Now I'm going to say it's not fair. I didn't sin the golden calf. Our family didn't sin the golden calf. They weren't there. Right? Our souls, I don't know if they were there, if they're not there. Depends, when our souls came here. Whatever the case is, but we weren't there. So you're going to say it's not fair. Right? Not fair. So what's the answer? The answer is that God says, you know what? Doesn't matter whether it's fair or not. It's irrelevant. The Jewish people at this point should not exist. So God says, okay, I'm going to have compassion. Where's my compassion over here going to go? Instead of dwelling amongst the Jewish people, I'm going to take my presence away. Because if I put my presence there, I'm going to wipe everybody out. I have compassion. So instead, I'm gonna put it over time. The time where the Jewish people are going to exist. Right? So Lahavdil will make a big distinction here. Imagine someone buys a house, they buy an apartment, they take out a loan. A 20-year loan, 30-year loan, right? They're going to pay interest, compounded interest, whatever, right? Whatever person's going to end up paying more than it's worth anyway. Fine, right? But that's, not everyone can put money down and just buy a house or an apartment outright. Fine, right? Nonetheless, okay, so you may pay more over time, right? But eventually it becomes yours. Now, this is not really a good example, right? But, I think we can understand the idea. God says, if I go amongst the Jewish people, there ain't going to be anybody left. I promise to be eternal, this and that. Fine. I'll start from Moshe Rabbeinu, wipe everyone else. And God says, and Moshe Rabbeinu says, no. Right? Not fair to wipe me, to wipe them out and leave me. No. They made a compromise. So the compromise was that God is going to take collective punishment over time. So there are things that will happen to the Jewish people, in every generation, right? There are going to be, it could be pogroms, could be other things that are going to happen that what? God's taking payback for the sin of the golden calf. Now, there are other sins also that the Jewish people, I'm sure, God forbid, have done that, God's going to, punish them as well, individually, collectively, etc. But the problem here is, if Aaron goes in and he wears the big days of, he wears the gold investments, because he's going into the Holy of Holies. How can he do that and defend the Jewish people when he really still sinned at some level with the sin of the golden calf? If that's really true, but he didn't get full atonement. Full atonement hasn't happened. And if full atonement has not happened, there's still something that exists in the world from that sin. So how can he do it? He shouldn't be allowed. He should be allowed to go into the Holy of Holies. Right? So says the Or Chaim HaKadosh here. But after the two sons of Aaron are taken and they die, then the sin is gone. Then the part of the sin that was left from that disappears. In other words, they atoned for that sin. And because they atoned for that sin, right, there's nothing left of the sin over here. Seemingly. Doesn't mean there's not collective punishment. Right? But at this point, when Aaron wants to go in the Holy of Holies, not a problem. He's not going to get accused. Why? Because the damage has been done. Right? The two sons died. So it's interesting to know, just as a side point, if a person did something wrong, either between God and man or between man and man, if a person truly repents, that sin gets wiped out. Totally wiped out. It's as if he never did it. Now, if it's a sin between man and again, depends what type of repentance they have to do, but we'll make it easy. Right? It's something that Yom Kippur can atone for. Right? You have to go through suffering, other things. So, something like that. Or, let's say, God forbid, they did something against a fellow man. They caused damage. God forbid they spoke Lashon Hara. And they got atonement. Right? The only way to get atonement between the sin between man and man is the fact that a person has to ask for forgiveness. If they don't ask for forgiveness, all the Yom Kippurs in the world, 50, 60, 70, however many Yom Kippurs they go through in their lifetime, doesn't atone. All the repentance in the world doesn't atone. Why not? Because it's a sin between man and man. In order to uproot the sin between man and man, you have to ask the person for forgiveness. Right? Once a person does that, and the other person grants forgiveness, okay? If it's done with a full heart, proper repentance, wiped out. That sin doesn't exist. But if a person doesn't do it, it's a sin between man and man, all the repentance, all the fasting, everything else you do, not worth anything. Because you have to ask him for forgiveness. In other words, that's going to go with you to the grave. That's going to go and attack you in the next world. When God says, okay, let's bring out all his mitzvahs, all his transgressions, right? Or her transgressions after 120 years. Part of those transgressions will be what a person did or said to somebody else. They didn't ask for forgiveness. And that goes with them. They didn't ask for forgiveness. Right? So, between man and man, how do we get atonement? You have to go through Yom Kippur. That's true. But if you don't ask for forgiveness, how is it that you're going to get atonement? Right? What are we saying over here? Right? Let's make clear. Make sure we have it clear. A sin doesn't go away if a person hasn't done proper repentance, right? Or something that's going to wipe it out, right? Really through repentance, right? So if there's a smidgen of that sin left, meaning in the spiritual world, if there's something left that he hasn't got full atonement for, it still exists at some level. And that's held against us. Right? When a person dies, that's still going to be held against you. When God's going to judge it, however he's going to judge it. So in this case, Aaron the Kohen is going to go in the Holy of Holies. He's going to serve God with the gold investments. How can he do it? He hasn't got true atonement. That was the question. In other words, part of that sin is still existing. It's still in the world, however that works in spiritual terms. Still in the world. So if it's still in the world, how can the accuser be the defender? That's the question. How can the accuser be the defender? What's the answer? So it says, Or Chaim Makadosh, you know what the answer is? He says the answer is 2 sons died. God got appeased by taking them for whatever reason, number of reasons we've spoken about. So therefore, the root of the sin, I shouldn't say the root of the sin, the imprint of the sin in this world and in the spiritual world disappears. Right? Totally disappears. But if a person didn't properly repent, and part of that sin is still there, it goes with you. It goes with you to the next world. It's going to come and accuse you. Right? We create angels when we do deeds. When we do, God forbid, transgressions and also mitzvahs. So when God judges the person after 120 years, what's God going to say? Okay, we're going to judge him. Let's bring up all the mitzvahs that they did. So the mitzvahs come out. When he prayed, shook a lulav, sat in the sukkah, ate matzah. Sometimes did it better, did it worse. So angels will come out either stronger or weaker. Right? These white, beautiful angels, either stronger or weaker, depending on how you did the mitzvah. Transgression, same thing. Whatever the transgression was, if he did it stronger, or he did it in a way, or he did it in a way where, it depends where he's holding, depends why he did it, etc. So the question is now a person did a sin, right? A person did something wrong, he thinks they repented, he didn't get full repentance, so that sin follows you. That's what it means. That sin follows you. Gonna smack you upside the head the next one. Because you get full atonement. There's no full atonement over here. Now, once the 2 sons die, so then that accuser disappears. Seemingly disappears. Well, why? Why is the accusing angel over here going to disappear? Because what's the accusing angel going to say? Accusing angel is going to say, hey, you still sinned at some level, the sin of the golden calf. Gold, remember, it's imagery. Gold over here. So now you're dressing up in gold. You're dressing up in the gold investments. You're going to go in the Holy of Holies. How dare you? Chutzpah. You're going to go in the Holy of Holies when you still have that imprint of the sin? How you do that? How in the world do you have to do that? Forbidden. Oh, but it's not true. Why? Because the accuser's gone. Why is the accuser gone over here? Because 2 sons die. His 2 sons die. And because 2 of his sons died, that's an atonement. That comes an atonement. So that gets wiped out. Says Or Chaim HaKadosh over here. But after they die, what's the next verse tell me? Right? Or let's say better, what's the Torah going to tell me? That you can't wear the big days of. You cannot wear these gold investments anytime you want. You go into the holy of holies whenever you want. That you're not allowed to do. Right? The Torah is only telling you after. Right? It's telling you after the fact. But there's atonement. In other words, that level of the sin is gone. Why is it gone? Because his 2 sons died. Right? His 2 sons died. Also, the Gemara brings down, when the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, wears the big days of, when he wears these gold investments, what happens? Get atonement. There's atonement over here. Nonetheless, says Or Chaim HaKadosh, he says, you don't want the accuser to be the defender, right? In other words, that the sin at some level may still be there. In other words, the Kohen Gadol, what's he doing? He's atoning for himself, for his house, and for the Jewish people. For the entire Jewish people. So the Kohen Gadol has to be, the high priest has to be squeaky clean. Squeaky clean, otherwise it wouldn't be the high priest. Right? Even though, later on, people bought or took the high priesthood when they went in the Holy of Holies, they died. I don't know what the great thrill over here is, being the high priest and doing the sacrifice, but because it's precedent, when someone wasn't worthy, went into the Holy of Holies, they died. So it might be just the thrill of the position, power, fame, all that, but make no mistake, when the high priest went into the Holy of Holies, if they were not fitting, what happened to them? They died. I don't know why that's such a great thrill. Right? What do you think? It's not going to happen to you? It happened to the person before you. There weren't any great shakes. I don't know. I'm much better. But all these people are no good. They just took it because they took it and they wanted to do it. Right? But it doesn't make a whole lot of sense knowing you're going to die. It could be. You say, wow, you're going to go in the Holy of Holies. Right? You're going to see God face to face. You're not going to see him face to face. You're not going to see anything in there. You're going to get your eyes punched out. You're finished. Right? It's over. Right? It's over here. So that's the whole question. How can he go in? But if it's already uprooted, if the sin's already uprooted, not a problem. Right? That wouldn't be a problem. Right? But that's the whole question. Someone who's coming in as an accuser cannot be the defender. And that's what's bothering, at least this part of the Or Chaim HaKadosh, that's what's bothering him. Because he shouldn't be able to go in. No way he should be able to go in. Because there's still some level of that sin. Right? Of the sin of the golden calf. But now we know it's been uprooted. Right? It's been uprooted. Because 2 of his sons die. So therefore, okay. Right? But there's still a question. We know that when the high priest wore that clothing, those gold investments, it was an atonement. It was an atonement, right? They're atoning for themselves and for the Jewish people. But if they already have this massive sin on them, maybe still, even if the sin goes away, right? I could see people, I could see people complaining left and right, right? And say, how can he go in? Look what he did. Look at some level he sinned. You want him to go atone for the Jewish people? They knew how great Aaron HaKohen was, right? They knew that he was just, or I don't know if they knew or not, but he was just stalling, right? He was just stalling. Obviously, he knew Moshe Rabbeinu was going to come back, and he's doing everything to stall. So at some level, it's on him, whatever level that is, very small level over here. But again, we mentioned before, when you're close to the king, you get burnt. You can get burnt over here. So then the question becomes, okay, even if he's atoned for, right? Even if he's atoned for, You still want to let him go in the Holy of Holies? You still want him to represent the Jewish people in the holiest day of the year? Right? Some people might say, again, maybe it's a small percentage. I don't know. Maybe it's a higher percentage. But some people are going to say, I don't get it. I don't get it. Why should we let him do it? He helped out with the golden calf. Right, but if you know what's going on behind the scenes, it's been totally uprooted, which they may not. So if they don't know it's totally uprooted, guess what? Doesn't look so good. Here he is dressed up, in the priestly vestments, these golden vestments. And they can say he still stinks. He still stinks to high heaven over here because of what he did or what he was involved in. Let's say, Ben, right? Let's say what he's involved in. Because anyone who's going to serve as a high priest in general has to be tremendously righteous. Tremendously righteous. If they're not tremendously righteous, they'll go in the Holy of Holies and die. And that's what boggles the mind. Yochanan Kohen Gadol, right, with the high priest for 80 years. And he became a heretic. It's very hard to understand. Very, very hard to understand. Why? Because he had to be on a very high level to go into the Holy of Holies once a year and come out alive. Right? And after he came out, after Yom Kippur, they make a whole feast. Right? And not so simple. See God face to face, you come out alive. It's pretty miraculous. So, Yochanan Kohen Gadol, after 80 years, 80 years going in and out of the Holy of Holies once a year, intact, somehow became a heretic. Very hard to understand. At face value, very, very hard to understand. So here, okay, we understand who Aaron the Kohen is. We understand to a certain extent, I don't know, he did something wrong, whatever it was, right? But have something like that, someone like that, he's going to go into the Holy of Holies, doesn't look good. Doesn't look good. But says the Or Chaim HaKadosh here, was wiped out. That sin got wiped out for him, not for the entire Jewish people. For the entire Jewish people throughout the millennium till the Messiah comes, we're going to pay for that sin. We're all going to pay for that sin. Now, a person can say, why is that fair? Right? That shouldn't be fair. I didn't do anything wrong. I wasn't there. Right? But what does the Torah tell me? The Torah says we can pay for the sins of our fathers. How does that work? So, if a person's parents went in the wrong, went in the wrong direction, and you went after them, you followed them, so then the curse applies. Then the sins of the father go on to the children. If the children, the Gemara says, don't go in that one. They don't go in that path. Right? If they don't go in that path, then that curse won't apply. Why? Because they're not doing what their father did. What their parents did. They went against it. And they fought against it. That curse won't apply. Right? The question is, someone says, so what's the difference between them? And when Hashem said he would no longer take the sin of the father or be the sin of the son, it's after the fact. It's after the fact. You're right. The sin of the father, the father did something minor. Now, not of an aviyu. There are a lot of different reasons we brought down. Many, many different reasons potentially, what caused their death. None of which over here, by the way, and what we said in Leviticus Chapter 10, have anything to do with the sin of the golden calf. Let's make that clear. Or Chaim brings us out. Brings us out from a verse in Deuteronomy. That's what it seems like. But there are a lot of other different reasons as well. Right? They brought strange fire they weren't allowed to bring. They drank. Potentially, the Torah says you're not allowed to drink wine and serve in the temple. They did that. Seems like. Or over here, they went into the Holy of Holies when they weren't allowed to. Right? That's going to be the next verse whenever we get it. Right? So now the question is, he sinned. Right? At some level. So Moshe Rabbeinu prays for his whole family, and he's able to save Aaron and the two others. These two sons he wasn't able to save. But there's another reason. That has nothing to do with what happened with Aaron. Right? Because the Torah says way back when, Book of Exodus, the building of the Mishkan, God says, I want people to sanctify my name. And the time that the Mishkan goes up, the time the tabernacle goes up, who sanctifies God's name? Two greatest people at that time. Who's that? Nadav and Avihu. So what does that have to do with sin of the golden calf? There are 6 answers plus, many, many answers over here to what Nadav and Avihu did. Now, there are a bunch that are written in the Torah explicitly. What you're not allowed to do, in serving in the temple, the Mishkan. And there are others, brought down by the rabbis. Now, that being the case, we have to understand that when is the sin of Aaron taken away? When is that imprint gone? That imprint 100%, says the Or Chaim HaKadosh, is gone after Nadav and Avihu died. So it's gone, right? So the question is, so what's the difference between what Hashem said he no longer, the sin of the father would be on the son? It's already after the fact. It's after the fact. Meaning that the atonement already came. When the Torah says that the son is not going to pay, or the son could pay for the sin, right? For the sin of the father, right? Nonetheless, they pay the price, right? They pay the price, but in the end, even if we didn't do anything wrong, not in this generation, we weren't there. So that sin, what Aaron did, whatever level it was, that sin for himself gets atoned for. But the sin of the golden calf is not atoned for. Where does it say that the sin of the golden calf is atoned for? Torah doesn't tell me that. His sin and his involvement is atoned because of what happened to his sons. The sin itself of the golden calf is still intact. 3,000 people die. The Erev, the mixed multitude, the converts, either came out of Egypt or other places. They're the ones that paid the price. They died, right? The Levites came and killed them. But that doesn't mean the sin wasn't there. That the sin's not uprooted. Yeah, they threw the calf. They threw the calf in the fire. Got burnt up. Right? God destroys it. Right? It gets destroyed. Fine. But that doesn't mean the sin's uprooted. Right? We're not saying the sin's totally uprooted. We're saying that the sin of Aaron got uprooted. His sin got uprooted. How did it get uprooted? How's he allowed to serve in the Holy of Holies with the golden vestments because 2 of his sons died? But the sin of the golden calf itself, who says that was uprooted? It wasn't uprooted. That sin we still have to pay for. Right? That sin we still have to pay for. Right? So, question is, how do they hold the sin against us? Of course, it's not a contradiction. Because the sin itself for Aaron, one sin. The sin for the entire Jewish people, totally different. It's a different thing. Just because Aaron's sin is atoned for, what does that have to do with us? How does that atone for the entire sin? It atoned for him, not for the Jewish people. That's a different issue. Jewish people are going to pay the price. Right? The two separate things going on over here. You have to remember, when the Kohen Gadol, when the high priest went into the Holy of Holies, he's atoning for who? For himself and for the entire Jewish nation. Right? That's what he's trying to gain atonement for. So therefore, what happens? So what happens is, there are two things. There are two things going on. You have what happened to the Jewish people in general, and himself and his own family. So for himself, God atoned. God atoned for his sin. But what about the Jewish people? So he doesn't have the ability to atone for that. For that sin, whatever's left of that sin, he does not have the ability to atone for it. So therefore, we're going to pay for it for the rest of the generation. Right? That's what we're going to do. We're going to pay for it. Well, what does that have to do with it? There are two separate things going on over here. You got what happened to Aaron and the Jewish people in general. Right? Now the question is sin of the golden calf not atoned for because it continues? It's not. I said that. It's not atoned. Totally not atoned. We're going through it. Every generation pays at some level for the sin of the golden calf. I'm only saying his part in it got atoned for. He himself, not for the Jewish people. Jewish people still pay the price. Right? So now someone could say, so what's the difference? A big difference. There's a big difference. We see that a person can be left intact. Let's say they sinned, they did a terrible thing, but God accepted their repentance. But he says, you're still going to pay a price. You're still going to pay a price. How are you going to pay a price? Because I'm going to destroy your kids. I'm going to destroy your family. I'll leave you like this, but there are going to be repercussions later. So it could be maybe they get a certain level of atonement. And even if they get a certain level of atonement, that doesn't affect their kids. Totally different. There are two different things, right? Two different things going on. But now comes on the Orach Chaim HaKadosh. The Orach Chaim HaKadosh here says that it says, I want to explain something to you, to us, that that I saw, that I understood when I was younger. So what did he say? So he says that in Deuteronomy chapter 9, verse 20. Deuteronomy chapter 9, verse 20, it says that Moshe Rabbeinu wants to get rid of any blemish, any level of blemish that happened over here. So what does he do? He says, I'm going to pray also for Aaron. I'll pray for myself, pray for Aaron, right? Pray for his kids. And we see what happens. We see that his prayer didn't work. Right? Because we see they drew too close to God. And they died. So two of them died, two didn't die. So his prayer only worked for two. He's able to save two. So he says, if you look at the next verse, when they drew too close to God, that's why they died. Right? But if it wouldn't be for that, if it wouldn't be that they drew too close, says the Orach Chaim HaKadosh, he says they wouldn't have died. So what's going on? Now, if we didn't have the sin of the golden calf, let's say that didn't exist. We'll take that off the book. Sin of the golden calf didn't happen. The Orach Chaim HaKadosh over here says, he says that Moshe Rabbeinu's prayer should have helped save everybody, but it only helped half. So the question is why? Why didn't it save his two sons? Now we have a lot of reasons potentially what happened, right? Why they died. Whether they brought a strange fire, whether they drank wine, whether they drew too close over here, whether God wanted to sanctify them anyway, sanctify, the greatest people, whatever. But he says over here, very interesting thing. He says, and this is what he said when he was younger. Like imagine how great he was even when he was younger. Right? What does it say at the end of the verse? It says, after the death of the two sons of Aaron, it says, B'kravosom lifnei Hashem v'yamus. They drew too close to God, in front of God, they died. They came close. Says Orach Chaim over here. Says the Orach Chaim HaKadosh. He says, really, Moshe Rabbeinu's prayer should have worked. It should have worked to save everybody. Totally should have worked. But he said, if not for the fact of the next verse, which I don't think we're going to get to today. But if you look at the next verse, where it says they drew too close, right? They're not allowed to go into the Holy of Holies whenever you want, etc. So they drew too close. He says, if it wasn't for that, forget about all the other things. Whether God's going to sanctify them, sit in the golden calf, they drank wine, whatever. Any of these things, that forget it. Because if it would have been up to Moshe Rabbeinu's prayer would have saved everybody, if not for the fact they went into the Holy of Holies when they shouldn't have. And because they went into the Holy of Holies when they shouldn't have, they got destroyed. Now, that's, so we mentioned this a few weeks back. It's very, very hard to understand. Right? They had an epiphany. And they're on such a high spiritual level. They wanted to see God's presence at that time. Problem was they weren't allowed to. They did it for the sake of heaven, other things. Forget about all the other reasons. Nonetheless, the Or Chaim HaKadosh said before, in the name of the Korban Aaron, couldn't think of it last night, I spoke on Pirkei Avos, that Korban Aaron says, if you're too close to the king, you can get burnt. You can easily get burnt. So, if not for the fact that they thought, whatever reason they thought, that they could defy what God said, and they could do what he doesn't want, even with the greatest of motives, they got fried over here. They were taken. I've compared this to what happened to Adam. God calls Adam a heretic, after he eats from the tree of knowledge. Why? Because Adam had a cheshbon, right? He made a calculation like this. If I take evil, I put it inside of myself. Every time I do the right thing, exponentially, my soul gets raised, my body gets raised in spiritual terms. But if I do the wrong thing, God forbid, I debase the body, I debase the soul. Now, God tells him, you're right. I agree with you 100%. That if you do the right thing, you go against your Yetzer Hara, you go against your evil inclination, exponentially go up unbelievably. And God forbid the other way. That God says is 100% true. There's only one problem. What's the problem? The obvious problem. God said, don't do it. That's the obvious problem. He said, don't do it. He said, I'm not interested in you not listening to me. That's why he calls him a heretic. Greatest creation of God. Right? Adam, first man created. Unbelievable creation. He calls him a heretic. Because he's trying to reinvent the wheel. Even though God agreed. Even if he agreed, so what? God had now has to go to plan B. What's plan B? Death. Is death a Jewish concept? No, never should have been. But God had to go to plan B. So now we got a similar thing, right? And in a certain way. They think they know better. They think maybe God's going to let this slide. He's not going to give them a hard time because look what they're doing. Look what their intention is. Look where they're holding. But what's the problem? If I was playing God, put on my George Burns glasses, my funny mustache, and what would I say? I would say, guys, you didn't listen. You didn't get the message. I said don't do it. I don't care what your intention is. Not interested in what your intention is. Might 100% been for the sake of heaven. Very good. And all the Kabbalistic intention and the beautiful. I didn't tell you to do it. I wasn't interested in you doing it. Now, if Moshe Rabbeinu says that who's to say Aaron and I, are greater than them, seems like they're greater in different ways. We'll see. Maybe we'll see. But they don't know better. Right? It's very, very hard to understand their calculation. And it could be, simple explanation, we could say they just got carried away. They got carried away so much spiritually, they forgot. They forgot. Or they rationalized saying, we're on such a level. God's not going to mind this. I don't know. God said don't do it. Right? So, I could speak about this forever. That idea. Because there are many examples. Many examples like this. Give one other example. Right? You see by King Saul. What is King Saul? King Saul is given a command by Shmuel Navi, Samuel the prophet, and he gives him a direct command from God. I want you to wipe out Amalek, women, men, children, everything, cattle, wipe them all out. So what does he do? Leaves the women, allows the king to escape, and he takes the best of the cattle he's going to sacrifice. Now he thought he did the right thing until Samuel the prophet hits him over the head. Now, Saul's no slouch over here. No slouch at all. At the same time, how can he have thought he did the right thing? Not only that, the king escapes, shacks up with somebody, has a child, and that's the offspring of Amalek who becomes Haman later. Unbelievable repercussions. So how can he think he did the right thing? But also very hard to understand. Right? We, to bring it down to our level, we're not in this world to reinvent the wheel. We got what the rabbis told us. We got what the Torah tells us. And that's it. And we got to keep it to the best of our ability. Some people like this, some people like that. It's hard. It's it. It doesn't matter. God said, shut up and eat the matzah. That's what we got to do. I don't care if you got 2 hours of sleep, 3 hours of sleep, 5 hours of sleep, right? All you men out there, you got to pray. That's what you got to do 3 times a day, right? Unless you're sick, you can't move, whatever. You got an obligation. No questions asked. I mean, life is easy. I'm not talking about that, right? But we're giving things that are clear what we have to do. So some people think, no, I'm going to embellish it. I'm going to add to this. I'm going to take out that. I'm going to do these other things. So what's the end result? What's the end result? You bring open-minded until your brains fall on the floor. And what happens? Disaster. You're going to add, or you're going to make innovations. Let's say better. You're going to make innovations, God forbid, or take out things, God forbid. And you're going to think, oh, that's going to enhance. Right? That's really going to enhance. What's the result? Disaster. It's an absolute disaster. We have to obey. Right? The Torah says in the book of Deuteronomy, we have to listen to what the Kohanim, what the priests tell us. Every generation, whether they say right is left, left is right, those are the rabbis in every generation. So we have what to do. We have a code of Jewish law. We're not reinventing the wheel. People think they're going to come up with all kinds of different things. Keep what you have to keep. Don't take on things you shouldn't be taking on. And I hear this a lot. Well, what about this and this Kabbalistic prayer? Forget it. You're not on that level. Most people aren't on that level. But yeah, but I heard it. Forget it. It's not for us. I heard someone tell me, they said, what do you think about the idea of getting up in the middle of the night saying Tikkun Chatzos? What's Tikkun Chatzos? Saying all these prayers and wailing about the destruction of the temple. I said, you want to mess up your days? Getting up in the middle of the night? Said, yeah, but I heard it helps this, it helps that. I said, you're not even holding by Aleph base. Barely. Right? You don't know how to learn. You've never really learned. Why are you taking on something? You're going to mess up your system. Right? So, you don't need me to tell you. There's someone asked this question of Victor Miller, a blessed memory, when Torah giants of the last generation. So Victor Miller said, it said more than 50, 60, 70 years ago. Victor Miller said the following: you want to say Tikkun Chatzos at night? I got a great idea. 2 minutes before you go to bed, sit on the floor. 2 minutes. He said, sit on the floor, think about the destruction of the temple and go to sleep. So, the person's going to say, that's it? That's all I can do, but I heard all these. Yeah, he said for that generation, for our generation, that's what we do. If a person wants to do it, are the vast majority of people getting up in the middle of the night to do it? No. You got to go to work, get other responsibilities, throw your whole body system off. Right? And what will the evil inclination do? And this is what I told this person. I said, the evil inclination will say, sure, get less sleep. Don't worry about it. Look how much you're going to learn. Look at all the benefits, all these different things. Unbelievable. But what's it going to do? It's going to kill you in the process. You're not going to be able to learn it all because you're going to be too darn tired. But the evil inclination doesn't stop. Come on, get up in the middle of the night. It's quiet. No one's making any noise. You can have real intention. Yeah, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. Someone say, I'll sleep during the day. I'll do this. At the end, why don't you maximize the time you're awake? Instead of getting less sleep per se. Right? Getting less sleep is a whole discussion of itself. Right? I don't really want to get into at the moment. But the point is people want to jump before they know how to walk. Or they want to run before they learn how to crawl. They want to study higher mathematics without algebra or trig, right? Or trigonometry. You can't do it. It's impossible. It's impossible to do. But see, you got speakers who speak in high levels, talk about Kabbalah. People shouldn't be listening to this. They're not holding anywhere. I don't know why people speak in that term, those terms. Oh, because it's Kabbalah. It's esoteric. Makes people feel good. All you do is yell and scream. Okay, maybe that's all I do. But we live in this world. I should go into the intricacies, which I can't. But let's say I could. And I go back to Exodus chapter 25, verse 8. God says, I want to dwell amongst the Jewish people. Well, very good. Major question. God's infinite. How do you put him in a box? So now let's explain all the spiritual world, how God constricts and contracts. Is anyone going to understand anything if I put it in the easiest of language to understand? Okay, it's a hard thing to understand. Right? Good, you move on. Right? But people like esoteric things. Okay. Very good. But those are very deep even without that. But if you don't know how to crawl, certainly you can't run. Right? And if you don't know how to run, you're not jumping. Right? People should never, ever jump levels where they're not holding. They're not going to get anything out of it anyway. You'll say, but what if it's so watered down? What if it's so watered down? So what? So what if it's so watered down? If someone speaks, they mention something, talk about like this, they water it down, explaining, whatever, fine. But if someone's going through a whole thing for a couple of hours, an hour, this, that, who's going to understand it? Who's really going to understand it? Maybe the person speaking. That's it. No one else really going to understand it. There's no point. I don't understand what the point is. I don't know. A person wants to sound philosophical. They want to show, their knowledge of Kabbalah, this, that, and giving it to the masses like that. Right? It doesn't make any sense. We want to stay to the levels. I'm not saying the person can't try and reach high spiritual levels. Not saying that. What we're saying over here is you're not going to try and reach it where you're not holding. I think it's ironic. So, you get these stupid actors. Actors is, I'm learning Kabbalah. Come on, you don't know Aleph Base. You got to be on a level to really learn Kabbalah. You don't know Aleph Base. Right? That's what someone told me. Studying for his quote unquote Reconstructionist rabbinic degree, whatever, it was at Hebrew University. Right? So I'm taking a course in Kabbalah. So I laughed. I said, about Kabbalah? Like learning about history Kabbalah? No, learning about the spiritual world and this and that and whatever. The person said, well, if I'm going to be a heretic, at least I should know what I'm going to be a heretic about. I laughed. So I said, well, so the person asked me, so what do you think about that? So I said, Madonna, or Esther, she calls herself, right? Madonna learns Kabbalah, let's say. And she doesn't even know the Aleph Base. I'd be shocked if she could read the Aleph Base, right? And if she can, good, all the power to her, right? Even if she can read the Aleph Base. Big deal. Rabbi said, she doesn't know the Aleph Base and she's learning Kabbalah. I said, you could also learn Kabbalah. The person laughed. He said, oh, that's very funny. I said, yeah, but I wasn't joking. I said, that wasn't a joke. I thought I told you if it was a joke. That wasn't a joke. I said, you know why it wasn't a joke? Because you never learned in your life. You never gone through one tractate at a time when you're not holding there. Forget one tractate. You haven't gone through many. You haven't gone through anything. So if you haven't gone through that much, you really want to think you're learning Kabbalah? Stick to what we can do. Stick to what we can fathom, right? That's what we got to focus on. And the other stuff, person wants to learn it later, good, right? But you have to have a certain level of knowledge, right? You also have to have a certain level of fear of heaven. You have to work on character traits. That goes without saying, right? But it is the work of the evil inclination. I don't think there's any question. That I don't think there's any question. Why? Person get up in the middle of the night every night. Maybe not Friday night, not on Shabbos, but not on a festival. But getting up every night in the middle of the night, it's gonna ruin your sleep. You say, I'll go to sleep early, I'll do this. I got better things I can tell a person to do, like to do some serious learning. I'm not gonna say, destruction of the temple, just push it off. I'm not saying that, but to get up in the middle of the night, it's a whole different thing. Victor Miller said 5 minutes, 2 minutes. Sit on the floor before you go to sleep. Think about it, and that's it. Forget about getting up in the middle of the night. Right? 2 minutes. That's our generation. You gotta say that's it? Yeah. That's it for us. We're not holding anywhere. Totally not holding anywhere. If someone's already up, can't go back to sleep, this, that, one thing. Do it on a regular basis, destroy the body. Person won't be able to function. Now, a person can function on that little sleeping and by and this and that. I'm still not going to say it's a good thing. Right? It's not something a person, should necessarily strive for. Right? So, So I guess before I go further, let me see. See if there are any questions here. Somebody here mentioned somebody asked, when you say the Shema, you say Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuso. Is it Malchuso or Malchuto? Right? We say so if you're Ashkenazic, you'll say Malchuso. We say if there's a tav without a dot in it, we say it as an F. If you're Sephardic, you'll say Malchuto. It depends. Right? It depends if you're Sephardic or you want to be Sephardic. So you pronounce it with a tav, with a T sound, not with an S sound. If you're Ashkenazic, then you do it with a malchuso. Yeah, let me see if there are any other questions. Someone here mentions someone asked about writing, let's say 13 principles of faith or methodology of faith on an index card and review it. Okay. I don't think it's a bad thing. You say it every day, right? After prayers in the morning, right? Some people have the custom of saying it every day, right? You say that every day. Person wants to write on an index card, and go through them. It's a good thing, right? Definitely a good thing. 13 principles, right? That make a Jew a Jew. If they go against it, and they don't repent, right? If they don't repent, then what happens? They lose their status as a Jew, right? They have to repent. These things are crucial for a Jew. Well, most of them don't apply to a non-Jew, but they definitely apply to a Jew. So a person wants, to go through them, write them down, go through them every day. Good thing, right? Definitely a good thing. I don't know. I mean, someone here says that they're the two totally different things. I don't know why that is. The same word, right? The question is, did you pronounce it malchuto or malchuso? Right? It's the same thing. It means the same thing. Right? No, there's no difference in what it means. It means his kingship. That's what it means. His kingdom. Let's say better. His kingdom. So whether you say malchuto or malchuso, it's the same. It's the same. I don't, unless someone brings me a source and says why it's different. I don't know why it would be different. Same. Should be the same. Yeah. Any other questions? Let's go a little bit further here. So comes on the Or Chaim Kadosh further, and he says, is that according to what we said, right, that was sort of in the middle here. That Moshe Rabbeinu, his prayer only helped half, right? That's what he brings down. He brings down for the Medrash, but he says that if they're going to die anyway, because they brought a strange fire, or sorry, they drew close. Because the Torah here says they drew close. If they drew close over here, so we said before, the prayer of Moshe didn't help, only helped for half. But the Orach Chaim HaKadosh says, I don't need that. I don't need to say only it worked for half. Because I have a Medrash. What does the Medrash tell me? It says, the Medrash says that the fact that you want to claim that there's a claim that Moshe Rabbeinu's prayer only helped for half, that what happens? Right now, it's an interesting way of looking at it. What do we say? We said that when he prayed, he was able to save the other two sons. But the reality is, these two sons died. So what was the benefit of Moshe's prayer if two died? Right? How does it help? How does it help over here? Right? Now he's looking at it in the other way. If you want to tell me the prayer itself helps, well, if it helps, didn't two people die? Two people died. Right? If two people died, then prayer obviously didn't seem to help. Or there's no benefit. There's no benefit to the prayer. The Moshe Rabbeinu's prayer. Why? Because two are going to die anyway. For any number of reasons, right? Or maybe just for this reason. Right? Because had they not, see, look what he's asking. He said, if they had not drawn close, they wouldn't have died. So if that would be the case, then what was the point of Moshe's prayer? He couldn't save them anyway. Right? He wasn't able to save them anyway. He's looking at it the other way. We looked at it before and said, oh, look, he saved half. He saved half his children. No, but two died. It wasn't just he saved half. Two died, period. So what does the prayer help? Two are going to die. So what could we say? Right? We'll see what the Orach Chaim here brings out. What could we say? Why look at it, the prayer only, why look at the prayer saying the prayer only helped? The prayer, didn't help, right? Why not? Why didn't the prayer help? Because the prayer seemingly didn't help for one very simple reason, right? The prayer didn't help because two died. It only worked halfway. But I could say, isn't that the benefit? Okay, he couldn't save everybody, but he was able to save two. So if he's able to save two, that's also good, right? Why don't we say that? He's saying the opposite. What's the prayer going to help? They're going to die anyway. There's no benefit. Seemingly no benefit. All right, but what does it say at the end of the verse? It says, after the death of the two sons of Aaron, because they drew close before God, that's the reason they died. Right? So now it comes on the Orach Chaim HaKadosh. He says, so what's the point of saying they died in the end? Right? That we've had a problem with all along. Because that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense over here. Because if the Torah tells me after they died, why are you telling me they died? Superfluous. Torah never repeats anything for no reason. So it could be, what is God telling Moshe? He says, these two, what did they sin? What was their sin? Either they brought a fire they weren't supposed to bring, or they drew close when they weren't supposed to, right? Either one. But they were already liable for a death penalty. Why are they liable for a death penalty? Because they got God ticked off. They got God ticked off, and God wanted to destroy Aaron. God had mercy. Instead of destroying Aaron, he took his two sons. But they're already liable. They're already liable over here for either reason. And for that, God's attributes of justice was not appeased. Right? So in other words, for whatever reason, either they drew close or they brought something they weren't supposed to, this strange fire, God already got angry. So they couldn't be saved anyway. Since they couldn't be saved, they're already liable for a death penalty, and God's attribute of justice going wild is going to take them. But if not for the facts that it mentions that they were liable for a death penalty, it could be once they entered the Holy of Holies, maybe God would have mercy. Maybe he would have mercy. Why? That's only in a case where his ire of anger, right? I don't even know if he can say that. His ire, he got so angry that he took him. But what if they weren't liable for death penalty? Let's say they did something okay. Wasn't the best thing they should have done. Right? But let's say they weren't already liable for a death penalty. If they weren't already liable for a death penalty, then what would I think? Then I would think, maybe God's going to have mercy. God can have mercy over here. But he says, what does the Torah tell me? The Torah tells me they drew too close. They drew too close in front of God. So because of this, how are they going to be saved? They went against what God said. They went into the Holy of Holies when they weren't allowed to. How is it going to be there's going to be a miracle that we're going to be able to acquiesce and appease God's attribute of justice? It's going to take an absolute miracle for that to happen. Right? So, obviously that wasn't going to happen because they're already liable. God's attribute of mercy cannot be invoked. Why can't it be invoked? Because the attribute of justice is already running wild. And therefore, since they're already liable for death penalty, can't be saved. Right? They're already liable for death penalty, he says, before. So then you have to say that what was the point of Moshe praying? Moshe's prayer doesn't go anywhere. Or you tell me it helps for half. Okay. But practically speaking, it won't save them. Had they not been liable for the death penalty, possibly they could have been saved. They possibly could have been saved. But the fact that they're already liable for death penalty, it didn't help. That's one explanation. One explanation, he says. Then he says, or you can explain it like this. After the death of the sons of Aaron, God spoke to Moshe and telling them, why did they die? Tells them in verse 2, why did they die? Because they drew too close. They came in front of God. They came in front of this great light. They came in front of God himself. No one can see God and live. That's what God told Moshe Rabbeinu. Right? God says, I want to be able to understand you, what goes on in this world. And what does God say? Impossible. No one can see my face and live. Right? So what is that? So God said you can only see me from behind. What does that mean? You can only see things in hindsight. You can't see things while you're going through it now. Impossible. We're never going to understand. Maybe once in a blue moon, God will throw you a proverbial bone. And he's going to show you how these different things add up and why you have to go through certain things. Maybe. Right? Maybe that'll be the case. But he says, what happened? They walk in, they die. No one can see God and live. And he says, that's the secret. That's the foundation of when righteous people die. When righteous people die, what happens? That's called in the Shika. It's called a kiss. God sort of gives them a kiss, takes out their soul. Right? That's the death of righteous people. As the Gemara says in Brachos 8a and in Moed Katan 28a, speaks about death of righteous people. And he says, and that's equal all righteous people. All righteous people. right? If they die such a way, that's a tremendous thing of love, right? God loving them, right? But he says that's a secret over here. You want to see God face to face, not going to happen, right? But it could be. Says it could be that righteous people die. And some righteous people can die just in their sleep. How do they die in their sleep? God takes out their soul, right? That's called Misa Nishika, right? Death through kissing, so to speak. And God sort of kisses the body, the soul, whatever, takes the soul out, right? Without going into all that, but that's what he's telling you. He's telling you this is what happened. He says the difference between righteous people, that die that way, they're closest to God more than anybody. So when they're closest to God more than anybody else, they die in a special way. They'll die unless there's some other decree or whatever the case is. So that's why it says when they drew close before God, it says Viyamusu. It says and they died. Right? And they died. Why the vav? Why the extra vav? Why the and? Just say they died. Why do I need the extra vav? So it says, Or Chaim HaKadosh, he says there's a hint. Again, he's not saying the simple explanation. Obviously, it's very deep here, but he said there's a hint over here of the fact that God loves the righteous, right? And he feels when they die, right? So therefore, because of this love, because of this desire for these righteous people, right? So what he does is, okay, he's going to take them for whatever reason, however old they are, whatever the case is. He's going to take them, but he's going to take them in a special way. He's going to take them in a special way, right? How's he going to take them in a special way? They're going to die. They're going to die by this, by this kiss, so to speak. He's also going to take them in a special way. Then he goes to a whole nother thing here, which extremely, I don't know, it's more like a riddle, I think, than anything else. And trying to figure out. So I'm not even gonna try over here. And then he says the sons of Aaron die right before there's a warning and their punishment. Right? It's also a little bit hard to understand. All of a sudden we hear that they die. I mean, you go back to Leviticus chapter 10, right? The beginning of Leviticus chapter 10, right? What does it tell us? It says, now the video, took their fire pans, brought this fire, whatever that they weren't commanded. And then fire came out and took them. But so then we're told that they died. But we're not told that this was forbidden and they did it and now they die. Right? It's a little bit of a difference over here. Right? Because it brings down, Talmud tells us and it says that, if you do X, Y, and Z, that you shouldn't die. It's not a punishment over here. Why? It's a warning. Right? People are given a warning, right? In general. So here, what happened before they died? It says after the death over here, after the death of the two sons of Aaron. So you say, well, after they died, right? But it was a warning. It was a warning before, right? It would seem that it wouldn't necessarily be fair. If a person died, they weren't warned. They said, oh, don't do this, because if you do it, you're going to die. Right? But what are we told over here? We told they died before what happened. Right? So he says, how can you have a case, that they should be warned before they die? And then the punishment comes afterwards. Because even if it says after the death of the two sons of Aaron, right? Seemingly we already know they died. Question is, when is the warning? Where's the warning given? So he says the reality is that they died before they're punished, before the punishment comes up. And that's why it says after the death of the sons of Aaron, right? That's what it says. That you see that what are they commanded? Commanded not to bring incense or strange incense or whatever the case is. And then it says, so you shouldn't die. So what do you see? That's the punishment. If they do this, that's the punishment. Because it says that we just mentioned, in the book of Leviticus Chapter 10, verse 1. It says, sons of Aaron took this ketores. What did they take? They took the incense. And then it says after the death. Right? So even though it says after the death, he explains they're not commanded, the punishment's not commanded over here. The punishment is only after they die. Normally, what would the Torah tell me? The Torah should tell me don't do this, because if you do this, you're going to die. Right? That's what the Torah would tell me. Over here, it just says after they died, and then it says, by the way, don't do this, because if you do it, you're going to die like they did. A little bit out of order. But then you can ask, he said, if that's true, then we have the question. Okay, so why did they die? Maybe you tell me it's not because of what they did. Right? Maybe it's not because of that. Why? Because if other people would have done it, they wouldn't be liable over here. Maybe they're not going to be liable for a death penalty. Why? Because there's no command. In other words, how is God going to punish someone, and say, okay, you did this, you're liable. Right? I'm going to take your life. What do you mean? You didn't tell me. Not written anywhere. That's why by the laws of Shabbos, for instance, right? The laws of Shabbos, there are only 3 things that the Torah says is forbidden, right? According to the laws of Shabbos. You're not allowed to cook. You're not allowed to carry, right? And it's a 3rd thing. I'll think of it in a second. Right, but there are 3 things that the Torah says explicitly you're not allowed to do. Now, we know there are 36 other categories. There are 39 categories altogether. So if there are 39, categories, but we're only told explicitly 3, then how can a person be severely punished where the Torah tells me if you don't keep the laws of Shabbos, you're going to get punished in this world and in the next one. And you're going to get spiritually cut off. You're going to die if you're born to get the right category, and then you're going to get spiritually cut off. Right? 2 things are going to happen. But if I don't know what the laws are, how in the world can God punish? That wouldn't be fair. Right? So over here, say the same thing. That the punishment is given later. In other words, if you do this, this is the punishment. Right? So it could be, since the punishment wasn't given yet, but the reason was given that they came in front of God. What's that talking about? They drew too close. If they drew too close, the Torah doesn't tell me you're not allowed to do that. The Torah only tells me later. But we do understand what's that going on. The fact that they drew too close, they came in front of God when they shouldn't have. And that we know, as the Talmud tells us. Tractate Yevamos 121a, 121b. Torah tells me, or the Gemara tells me, that people can be taken if they're righteous. They can be judged what we call kachut asara. Chut asara means by a hair's breadth. And if a person does something minor, it can be considered something very big. And that's why the Torah here adds a vote. It says, Via Musu, and they will die. And they died. In order to tell you that really they're already obligated for death penalty before, but the punishment's not told yet. Right? A little bit sneaky here, meaning Torah's telling me they're going to die. They're liable. Okay? And even if they are, even if they're 100% liable, the punishment has not been given. The warning has not been given. So comes along the Orthodox Kadosh and he says, okay, I got a problem. Why does the Torah tell me after the death of two sons of Aaron? And then it says they drew close in front of God and they died. I know they died. It says after their death. I already know they died. Why do you tell me? Why do you tell me that? And really the question was, why do you say Via Musu? Why do you say the Vav and they died? Just say they died. So says the Or Chaim HaKadosh over here. You know what that means? He said it means like this. It means that they died, you're right. 100% that they died. But the warning for what they did wrong was not given yet. That's why it's an extra vote. Right? In order to teach you that really they weren't liable for what they did because the command wasn't given. You're going to say, but didn't they know the Torah before it was given? It doesn't say they did. Right? So maybe you say that they're obligated at a higher level here. But they are obligated at a higher level anyway. Right? But the point is, how can you obligate them if the warning hasn't been given? So what's the answer? The answer is that they were already liable for death penalty before. That's what we said. They're already liable before. If they're already liable before, then otherwise they have to be warned. People have to be warned before God's going to zap them. How can God take them if they're not warned? You can say they should have known better. I don't know. Right? Doesn't matter necessarily how great they are or how great they were. If God doesn't warn for what he doesn't want us to do, then why are you going to be liable? Why would anyone be liable for what they did? If there's no warning. See, I mentioned the laws of Shabbos because if you don't hold by oral law, you're in trouble. You're going to be in serious trouble. Why? Very simple, because a lot of things you're going to be liable for, the Torah doesn't tell me. How can the Torah tell me you're going to be liable for all, for these different things? I don't know what they are. Right? The Torah tells me I have to sit in the sukkah. It doesn't tell me what a sukkah is. How big, walls, anything. And you got to bring palm fronds and nice smelling fruits, right? My lemon on steroids, willows, myrtle leaves, bring them in front of God for 6 days. What does that mean? No definition. But see, if a person's going to get, God forbid, the death penalty, then how can God give the death penalty if he doesn't tell you what it is? He doesn't explain what the mitzvah is in all its repercussions. That wouldn't be so fair, would it? Comes on Or Chaim HaKadosh and he says, so that can't be the reason they died. It's a warning for later. So why'd they die? Other reasons. But he's telling you if they wouldn't be liable for a death penalty, this never would have happened. I don't need these verses. Totally irrelevant. Because without that, they would have died. Right? The Or Chaim HaKadosh here says, if not for the fact they drew close, right? I wouldn't have known necessarily that they died for that. But even, necessarily without that, even if I said I didn't need that verse, Don't I know they're already liable for death penalty from before? Right? They're already liable before. So what's he telling you? He's telling you that extra vav in the words, via musu, that's what's coming to teach you. Right? That's what's coming to teach you. Yeah, take questions here. Someone asks, was Hashem warning Korach? What happened to Aaron's son? Moshe warned Korach. Moshe warns Korach, and he says, we'll get there. I don't know. I don't know how many years we'll get there, but he warns Korach, and he says, if you don't listen to what God says, what I'm telling you, God says, God's going to take care of you. He warns him. Totally warns him. Right? Eliyahu Navi, lies the prophet with the Navi Abal, with the prophets of Baal, also warns them. He says God's going to judge between us. God's going to see when the fire comes down. It was a warning. 100% it was a warning. He gave an opportunity to repent. They didn't have that opportunity. It's a difference. They weren't warned ahead of time. But they were already liable for death penalty, as it was. They weren't warned before. Right? So this is different. Moshe is giving them a warning. He's giving Korach a warning. And he laughed at him. Okay? He did everything he could to try and bring him around. Didn't happen. He was stubborn. Didn't want to listen. Jealousy killed him. That's what happened. That's exactly what happened. And him and 250 great people with him, they got all swallowed up. Them, all their property, everything else. You're right. They didn't bring a strange fire. We're not talking about that. You're right. They want to bring a fire, whatever, but that's not the same thing. They weren't going to the Holy of Holies. Right? The question was, who's God going to take over here? Korach or Moshe? We know what the answer is. Well, not because they're going to the Holy of Holies. It wasn't like they made a wrong fire over here. He warned them. Moshe Rabbeinu warned them. And he said, if you do this, God's going to take care of you. He's going to take care of you. They didn't listen. God took care of them. But there's a major difference. Didn't happen over here like that. They didn't get warned. It was after the fact. Right? It could be God wanted to sanctify the Mishkan, so he took them. Or it's because of the sin of the golden calf. These are other reasons around it, surrounding it. But it's not necessarily the reason. And they already died before the whole point is, they already died before the warning. So if they died before the warning, that's not the reason. It has to be another reason. Potentially other reasons. Moshe Rabbeinu warns them, if you do this, you go against me, or whatever, God's going to judge between us. So fine. They make their fires, they do this. Nothing wrong with it. They're not bringing it to a place they're not supposed to. It's a totally different thing. Right? Totally different thing. Yeah, someone asked about Rosh Chodesh. There are 2 days Rosh Chodesh for this month of Adar. Right? It'll be the first Adar. And someone asked by the sighting of the moon. Right? The sighting of the moon, if it's an old moon, right, 3 24-hour periods. I don't know. I don't know what the what the calculation is. But I will say, well, however it looks, right? However it looks at the beginning, it's going to be a small sliver, very small sliver, the beginning of the month. But you have to remember, right? Not based on calculation today. Not based on what you see in a telescope or anything else. Hillel, the time of the Second Temple, fixed the calendar. Right? He fixed the calendar where, I think 7 out of 19 years, they're going to be leap years, like this year. Right? We go by a lunar calendar, and we lose a couple days a year, right? It's 11-day difference. So every so often, you're going to need to have an extra month. Why? Because Passover has to be in the spring. The Sukkot has to be in the fall. So if that happens, you need to make a calculation, because the Muslims, make a big distinction here. They have Ramadan all times of the year. Be winter, spring, summer, or fall. They're also on a lunar calendar. Right? But they don't make adjustments. We make adjustments because we have to, because the Torah says clear. Passover is in the spring. Sukkot has to be in the fall. So Hillel figured it out. All right, figured out the calculations to a T. So we don't have to worry about what the moon looks like, doesn't look like. It's got a sliver, doesn't have a sliver. He figured it out for all generations. We're relying on this calendar. So it doesn't matter what we see, what we don't see. We're relying on what Hillel did. Right? So therefore, so normally the new moon was done in Israel. Right? They sent out witnesses, to see the new moon, and then things got messed up. So Hillel had to calculate. Hillel made a calculation. He made a calculation. Used to be done by witnesses. We don't do it that way today. We don't have a temple anyway, etc. But because of destruction, so he devised the system, which we hope that's what we hold by today. So it went by what, when they were in Israel, what they saw, and they sent messengers out to say this, they saw the moon and it looked like this and whatever, and they told, they went on one mountain, and they waved flags, or not flags, but they waved these big sticks, with fire on it, telling, and other people on another mountain to another mountain, until everyone outside of Israel knew that it was a new month, or maybe it was delayed, or whatever the case was. So we don't have that today, right? We definitely don't have that today. So what do we have? We have that calendar, and that calendar was fixed, right, in the time of the Second Temple. So that's what we go by, right? That 100% we go by. If someone asks, Adar is an extra month this year. Yeah, any leap year. Any leap year is always an extra Adar, right? Different reason why, not for now, but Adar, the extra month is always right before Nisan, right? Nisan's the first month, so it's last month, right? The last month of the year is Adar. So anytime there's a leap year, there are two Adars. There's Adar Aleph and Adar Beis. Adar Beis, Yapur, right, on Yud Dalet, 14th of Adar, and the 15th if you're in Jerusalem or any walled city. That was time of Shua ben Nun, of Joshua, etc. But yeah, every leap year, when there is a leap year, there will be two Adar. There's no other month. There's no other month that's doubled up, right? Except for Adar. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. Somebody asked a book of the Hovetz Chaim of the mitzvahs. Yeah, I'll send that out. I'll send that out later. Yeah. Any other questions? All right, let's go a little bit further. So we said before, the very beginning of all these classes on Leviticus chapter 16, that God spoke to Moshe after the death of the sons of Aaron. What did he say to Moshe? We don't know. Doesn't say, right? It says the Orach Chaim Hakadosh. We don't know. We don't know what was said. So Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah gave a parable, right? We mentioned this before because Rashi brings it down. That he said that a person got sick, goes to a doctor. Doctor says, don't eat radishes, don't sit in cold clothing, etc. And then someone else comes in, and the doctor says the same thing. Says, don't eat radishes, don't stay in cold clothing, wet clothing, so you shouldn't die like this person died. Now, obviously, he's warning the second person more than the first person. First person, he just said, don't eat this, don't stay in wet clothes. Second person, he said, don't eat this, don't stay in wet clothes, because you might die like someone else died. All right, so now he says we need to understand that Rebbe Eliezer ben Azariah over here, puts it in this order. Right, he's saying, it's interesting. He says it says that Rebbe Eliezer ben Azariah said, and he used this mashal, he used this parable. He says, why doesn't it say that just Rebbe Eliezer ben Azariah said this? Why does it say use this parable or whatever? A little bit strange. He could have just said, okay, this is, Rebbe Eliezer ben Azariah said this. A lot of times the Talmud will say, okay, this rabbi said this rabbi said that. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to give a parable. Sometimes they do, right? But, a lot of times they don't. So why do you give a whole parable over here? Just say what he said. Right? So Or Chaim HaKadosh says, no, that's not the question. All right, Noach said up. So that's not the question. What's the question? He says another question. Why did the Torah here wait up until this time to give this command? It says God spoke to Moshe after the death of Aaron. Yeah, but guess what? We're 6 chapters already behind. The Torah already said, Book of Leviticus Chapter 10, why the sons of Aaron seemingly died. All of a sudden, it comes 6 chapters later, right? My cashier, what's the connection? Why do I need it over here? All right, not the whole thing. Why give me this parable? Why say like this, say like that? What's it doing here? It's out of order, right? Totally out of order. So he says, oh, I gave a parable. This case of a doctor, right? And the second patient, he says, don't do like this, just like this other person did because, so-and-so died. Because until the time that the sons of Aaron died. So here, there's a greater warning. Don't do like this, because look what happened to the sons of Aaron. But then comes along Rebbe Eliezer ben Azariah, and he answers with this parable, right? With this double parable here, seemingly. There's 2 things as part of the parable, let's say. But he says, interesting. He says like this. He says sometimes, what does the Talmud do? Sometimes it'll mention, let's say, Rebbe Eliezer ben Azariah said this, or Rabbi Yochanan said it, or Reish Lakish said it. It'll mention something they said, and they'll mention an answer without going through the question. In other words, it could be the question's already asked well before. And then their statement will come in without asking the question. In other words, they give an answer through, a whole discussion, and they give an answer. All right, what was the question? The question was already asked before. Right? We know the question was asked before. So here, he comes to answer. He comes to answer in the first thing. Right? What was said? Right? Seemingly double thing over here. We already know in Leviticus chapter 10 what happened. Now I mentioned it the second time. Right? So now he's coming to answer. Why does it say this first thing over here? Because we see that anyone who comes too close to God, they get burnt. They get burned with fire. Right? With holy fire. So say to Aaron and his brothers. Right? So say to Aaron, your brother, anyone who comes in, that's the next verse. Anyone who comes too close when they're not supposed to, they're gonna get burnt. But there's a problem. What's the problem? Problem is, he says, but you already told me after the death of Aaron's sons. Right? It's already after the fact. Right? If it's already after the fact, then what's it doing here? Right? In other words, it should have been broken up into two things. What should he have said? After the death of his two sons, then he comes to say to Aaron, don't do this or don't do that. Right? Don't come in whenever you want. Right? But if everything was already, if everything Moshe already told to Aaron, then obviously he knew it. Right? So he says, what's going on over here? What in the world am I coming to answer? Right? That's what he seems to say. What am I answering over here? I got double language in a parable. Okay. So what? Well, why is it so far from what was said before? Right? In order to teach you that if you do this is what's going to happen. Okay. Right? But it's already after the fact. He didn't tell him, at that time. He waited. Right? He ended up waiting. But he said he could ask, okay, so why do you wait? So it must be that if something was already known, he just, whatever, waited over here. So he says, okay, let me explain. He says, at the end of what Rebbe Eliezer ben Azariah says, right? He says, this one was more fastidious than the first one, meaning, what does the doctor say? Right? The second person, he says, don't eat this thing, don't stay in wet clothes, you might die like this person died. Well, that's obviously being more fastidious in the first case. Right? Okay. He says, therefore, he says, speak to Aaron. Right? Speak to Aaron and tell him, who he's talking about, obviously his brother. Right? And place in his heart that what? You're not allowed to come in whenever he wants. You're not allowed to come in whenever he wants. Right? So I would say, okay, so what's going on over here? So it could be, even though it doesn't come before, I would say it's kind of like a run-on. That's what I wanted to claim. Right? In other words, God spoke to Moshe. I don't know what he said. Doesn't say what he said. But after the sons die, because they drew too close, right? And they died, we saw what the problem was by saying then they died in the end. Right? We understand, a few different ways how to look at that, because that seems superfluous. But then it says in verse 2, which we're not going to get to, but it says in verse 2, God said to Moshe, speak to Aaron, saying, don't go into the Holy of Holies whenever you want, blah, blah, blah. Don't draw too close and come whenever, blah, blah, blah. It's all one thing. You're right. The parable is what? The parable is saying, don't do like this because, look what happened to so-and-so when he died from it. So that's the end of the statement. In other words, comes Rebbe Eliezer ben Azariah going to say, what's this whole parable? What's it answering? Right? We spoke about this a few weeks ago. What's it coming to answer? My kesher, it's out of whack. It shouldn't even be here. This should be in Leviticus chapter 10. Oh, but you tell me now, after the fact, right? After the fact that two sons died, what did they die from? Gee, I'm not sure, right? Seems like they died because they brought a strange fire. Seems like they died because they came when they shouldn't have come. Seems like they died because they drank wine. But in the book of Exodus before, it says, no, maybe it's because of the sin of the golden calf. Maybe God, when he put out the Mishkan, wanted to sanctify some people to make his, sanctify his name, right? And all that. So he says over here that what's the question, right? The question is, now I understand. It says, now I understand because if I do something and I'm not supposed to, punishment is much greater, right? That's the connection. In other words, you're going to tell me over here, why do I need the double language in the parable, right? The second language much stronger. So what's the connection? Connection is what exactly he said to Aaron. He said, you're not allowed to come in whenever you want. You're being warned, don't do this because you might die from it. So that's the warning, right? That's the warning that he gives. Again, what do we see? we see that we need to know how to properly learn. Well, what do I mean? We look at this verse, and we've been, going through different possible explanations. Different possible explanations, of what's going on. Because we have an obvious question. And the obvious question is, we're in Leviticus chapter 16. This belongs in Leviticus chapter 10. Now, if we were Karaites, got to come up with an answer. Have to come up with some sort of answer. What it's doing over here. Oh, we don't hold by oral law, okay? You don't want to hold by these different explanations, okay? Got a better one? See, we can't learn Chumash or learn anything else, without using our brains, without thinking. Right? We could read this and not knowing anything else. Okay, this is what happened. This is what happened with this. This is what happened with that. But see, what happens when you know a little bit more information? And again, forget about oral law. It has nothing to do with oral law. I know other information. What's the other information I know? I know that this is already brought in next in Leviticus chapter 10. I already know that. Now we found out there's a verse in Deuteronomy talks about the destruction of Aaron, or what should have been the destruction of Aaron, which was only the destruction of his two sons. So that's over there. I got Leviticus chapter 10. Makes sense. Right? Got to make sense. So anytime we learn, we can't take anything for granted. Take nothing for granted. Right? And that means our questions may not necessarily be questions. It could be commentaries ask the question, or if they don't, then most likely it's probably not a question, because we're not going to think of something that people 10 times, 50 times, 100 times, 1,000 times greater than us never ever thought of. Right? That's really probably never going to happen. Right? So therefore, when we're trying to analyze something, when it comes to Chumash and Tanakh in general, not an easy thing to learn. There are multiple levels here, right? How we're supposed to take it, how we're supposed to look at it, how it relates to us, etc. But we have to keep our minds straight. We have to, keep in mind what's going on. How the narrative is going, what statements are being said. Then we have to think, okay, this makes sense. Do I have any questions? Is it straightforward? Maybe some things are more straightforward, things less straightforward. And sometimes people get caught up with the fact, things are out of order, right? As we mentioned. We see by the sin of the golden calf many chapters later when it happened earlier. That's not a contradiction. Rashi, others say, Ein mukdam muchar b'Torah. Things are not necessarily written, right, in chronological order. It means there's no beginning, no ending, meaning Moshe Rabbeinu, when he wrote it down, he didn't necessarily write it exactly when it happened. But you tell me, there is a certain method over here, because we do see that there is juxtaposition of verses, and we do learn things from juxtaposition of verses. Okay. And you have to know when to do that, when not to do that. But again, looking at it, I have to think. I don't like reading a newspaper over here. Right? I got to think. Some things are easy to understand. Some things are, what you see is what you get. Many other things, multiple layers. Right? And it's just, I think it's ironic that, some people will think, oh, Chumash, so easy. I know it backwards and forwards. Very easy to ask just a couple questions and like, gee, I never thought of that. Gee, I never thought of this. Gee, I never thought about the other thing. Of course you didn't think about it. Why'd you have thought about it? You just know how to read it backwards and forwards. You know the stories. Very good. But you don't know what's behind them. Right? That's why, it's ironic, in a certain way. You see what the Christians do. They have an agenda. Misinterpret, what do you call it? Mistranslate, all kinds of things to make it fit according to their agenda. But The irony is, they take some of the most difficult verses. No, it really means this, it means that, it means the other thing. But see, the problem is that according to the Torah, there's internal logic. And we have to understand what that logic is. But there's internal logic. Right? The Torah, I'll give one example. The Torah says, the book of Deuteronomy, that you don't have to add or subtract to the Torah. Now, if that's true, you go to Jeremiah chapter 30, it talks about a quote unquote a new covenant. So how can a prophet who believes in the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu, and everyone agrees he's a true prophet, say there's going to be a new covenant, we throw out the old covenant? It's internal logic. Can't say that. So why to say new covenant? Oh, you have to look at the context. See what it says. Fine. Right? But there are certain things, certain fundamental principles you can't go against. And if you go against them, then you're making something up. You're making up a new religion or whatever. So there are things that we do know. There's a lot to know, what the Torah says. But if that's the case, and there's plenty what to know, okay, I have to get the details straight. And if I have the details straight, I get to these verses, or this verse, which is still not done with. I get to this verse, I should have a number of questions. Now, this doesn't mean we're going to come up with the exact same questions, right? But if we're thinking critically, we know the Bible the way we should come up with the same questions. Might not come up with an answer, but we certainly could have come up with a question, right? I'll give an example. Right? God says, beginning of the book of Genesis, let there be light. God says there was light. What's the problem with that statement? Tremendous problem. When is the sun created? Day 4. So what light are we talking about? Rashi asked the question. Other people ask the question. The logical question. Right? So if I know certain things, and then I read other things, they don't jive, they don't mesh over here, then either I'm reading it wrong or, the commentary is going to ask the question. It's not like, it's not going to be asked. It could be either it's a question or it's not a question. But there's eternal logic. It's not just like a whole hodgepodge. There's many, many things going on behind the scenes. Right? We see that clear. You see that by the book of Esther. You see that there are a lot of things. There are a lot of things that happen. Each event looks insignificant. Looks pretty insignificant. But all the events add up and are crucial to overthrow Haman and get him killed. But you need each thing. So you say, but that book does not have God's name written in it. True. God's name, if you look, it's not written anywhere. Not written anywhere in the book. But what do you see? Even though God was hidden, God's there the entire time. All these different events are going to add up to bring Haman down. That's what's going to happen. But you need each event. And each event in and of itself is significant. Right? Not such an easy book to understand in different ways. But there are basic things we do know. And even if we know them, okay, we're not reading anything like a newspaper. We have to think. We have to think. So, I mentioned earlier, while people learning Kabbalah and, and other things, this stuff's pretty deep without even getting anything Kabbalah. I haven't said anything about Kabbalah. Right? There is something in Rebbeinu B'chai, which we're going to get to next week, that, I mentioned the whole thing, whole medrash and, different things. And then he has the whole thing about Kabbalah. Okay? He's got a Kabbalistic thing there. But, we go another 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, not mention Kabbalah at all. Is anyone missing out? I don't think anyone's missing out here. Might be some interesting esoteric things. Right? But are we really missing out? It's pretty deep without it. Trying to figure out what's going on over here. Trying to, it's like an untangling a web. It's a web. You have to take the different parts out. You have to try and fathom, okay, What's he saying? Why is he saying it? Whatever. The Torah is very ambiguous. We made clear many times. Torah is very ambiguous. So how could you learn Torah without oral law? Impossible. They say, the Karaites are going to have to say they have their own tradition. They have their own rabbis, their own, whatever. Okay. But, they're also relying on, whatever they're relying on. So, majority of the time, the Torah 100% is ambiguous. It doesn't give me any answers. We think we're getting an answer over here in verse 2. You're not allowed to draw close, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so how does that reconcile with Leviticus chapter 10? Problem. Doesn't reconcile so well. Right, even trying to answer up, we're trying to answer up. Right, it's not so simple. We see it's not so simple. So, I think I'm going to stop there. Maybe one other thing. Maybe in the Torah Chaim, not much left here. But I think either I'm going to save whatever's left for next week, or just I'll continue with the Rabbeinu B'chai after that. Yeah, so I'm going to stop there. Any questions on any of that? Or I'll take any general questions. All right, there are no questions, then I'm going to sign out. Just want to remind everyone, 12:30 Eastern time, 7:30 Israel time. I'm going to do Tanakh Talk, controversial issues at TanakhTalk.com. Topic is going to be, are women allowed to carry guns? Right? Is it considered just a man thing or not? I'm going to speak about that. And then I'm going to do a class on no-hide nations, on no-hide laws at 2:30 Eastern time, 9:30 Israel time. Anyone has any questions, find me on Facebook at Michael Chaim Kaufman or Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism. Send me an email, rabbichaimkaufman@gmail.com, RBBICHAIMCOFFMAN @gmail.com. Because everyone a good middle of the day, end of the day, beginning